Now let's see. We'll see how it works out once we finish. So here we've got this idea of shift. Now you understand this aggregate supply curve. They might shift as a result of changes in what? Either prices, availability of raw material. Remember when we talked about the cost of production? Here the same thing. The prices of available raw material. And business tax changes. So if businesses have to pay less taxes or they get tax cuts, then the cost will be less. And if it becomes less, remember the curve of the supply, it will shift down, or maybe in other words, it will shift to the right. It means you can produce more. And environment or workplace regulations, if they change, they can also change the supply curve. So let's say the government says, you have to do this and this and this and this, then you can't produce as much. It will shift to the left. You see? Or shift up. It's the same thing. Left or up is the same thing. And then here we've got this idea of competing theories of short-run instability. Economists are not in complete agreement about how to achieve desired macro outcomes. So even, you see, here, this is like enough. Economists are not in complete agreement about how to achieve desired macro outcomes. So this idea of like inflation and employment and, does this leads to this or this leads to that, economists themselves, they're not in agreement. And how do you see like a very big evident, remember like let's say Obama and Hillary and Trump, they said this is my economic policy, and the economists behind, they say this is like the best solution. And then, Trump comes with like an absolutely different, set of policies and economists, and they say, okay, this will do. And then these people, they come and they do it and it fails. And these people come and do it and it fails. You see? So the economics is like very complex to the point to control it as a whole, it is very difficult. But economists, they try to just understand like one bit at a time, ceteris paribus. And so macro controversies focus on the shape of the aggregate supply, the aggregate demand, and the potential to shift them. Now let's look at this idea of demand-sided. What do we mean by demand-sided theories? Keynesian theory, monetary theory. These people believe that you need to look at the demand. Okay, how can you influence? Remember when he said, government should intervene? So they start to see how can we, government intervene the demand side. So how can we make people demand more, demand less? How can we shift demand to the right, demand to the left? Do you see? Better
use of resources.
It's always about better use of resources. But these, they start to look into how can we make people spend more or spend less. You see, we'll let people as consumers buy more or buy less. So that's how they try to look at the economy. Keynesian theory says, it argued that if people demand a product, then producers will supply it. So the main drive for supply is demanders. Aggregate spending isn't sufficient. Some goods will remain unsold and some production capacity will be idle. So the monetary theories, on the other hand, they focus on controlling money and interest rates as a mechanism for shifting aggregate demand curve also. So here, what do? If they give people money, people will spend it. And if they give people cheap credit, they will borrow and buy things. So it's how they affect the ability and willingness of people to buy goods and services. Are you guys okay with these theories? So we've got demand side theories, the Keynes. It says people buy. And the monetary, give people more money, they will buy. If the right amount of money is not available, aggregate demand might be too small, and high interest rates will decrease aggregate demand. So from a monetary theory, you want demand curve to, shift all the way to the left. What do? Increase interest rates. People will not buy. Now these are the other side, the supply side theories. Now the supply side theories says a decline in aggregate supply will cause output and employment to decline. So here, if you start to put this aggregate supply it can make people not find jobs. The focus on supply side theories is to get more output by shifting aggregate supply curve to the right. So if we can have the supply to shift more to the right, then we will have more output and we will be able to get cheaper prices. So let's see, this is the aggregate supply. So if you shift it to the right, then if you move from here to here, then you will be able to get cheaper prices. If it goes the other way, you will get more expensive prices and less quantities. Now here, demand when it shifts. If this is the demand, if it shifts to the left, you have less prices, less quantity. If it shifts to the right, then it will move from here to here, and here we will have more prices and more outputs. Okay, so here we start to see shifting, how it works in both cases. Now, policy option, essentially, the government has three policy options. So what can the government do? Shift aggregate demand, shift aggregate supply, or do nothing. How many people agree with the do nothing? The classical, remember the classic theories? They say do nothing. And then we've got the Keynesian and the monetary policies. They say look at the demand. And we've got the other theories that says, you know what, see the supply, produce more. Fiscal policy, the use of government taxes and spending to alter macroeconomic outputs. And the fiscal policy is, look at this. I have to leave. All right, go. Fiscal policy is conducted by Congress and the President. Do you see you know what's fiscal policy? Remember fiscal policy?
Yes.
Was it Ministry of Finance or Central Bank? Ministry of Finance, they do fiscal policies. So they say higher taxes, or they say more customs, more tariff, double taxation. Monetary policy, it is the use of money and credit to influence macroeconomic activity. Federal Reserve is the regulatory body that controls the supply and demand. You guys know what's the Federal Reserve? That's the central bank. So in Yemen, it's like the central bank of Yemen. And supply-sided policies, supply-sided is the use of taxes, deregulation, other mechanism to increase the ability or willingness to produce goods and services. So this supply, it is more on the deregulation, on the tax rates. So it is more coming from Ministry of Finance. These people affect supply. So changing choices of policy levers, the do-nothing approach prevailed until the Great Depression. Do you guys remember? Until the Great Depression, the idea was do nothing. And then after the Great Depression, people started to have the desire to be more active government role. And then we started to see fiscal policies dominate the economy in the 1960s. And the promise of fiscal policy was tarnished by its failure to control inflation in the 60s. So even the people who used fiscal policy and they started to take government expenditures, taxes, they thought they would be able to control, and it also failed. And then we've got the monetary policy. They thought, okay, monetary policy is the solution, and this was in the 70s. And there was a heavy reliance on monetary policies, ended with a recession at the end of the 70s. So you can see here like the different policies for the economy as a whole to fix it, and we still see it fails. And then in the 80s, we started to see more supply side. They say, you know what, the demand fails. Let's try the supply. And then Reagan was one of the big, and then we started to see Bush looked at the less activist approach in the 1990s. Clinton started to do more contraction in the 90s, and then fiscal policy retreated, cleared the way for re-emergence of the monetary policy. So you can see, they went back from the fiscal, go back to the monetary. Maybe it will fix the economy. But still, we start to see the fiscal restraints of the late 90s. They help the federal budget move deficits to surpluses. And then this is like more historical U.S. 2001, 2, 3, Congress cut taxes, attempts to deal with the recession. So they saw there's a big recession, maybe we can give people more taxes to spend more. What do you guys think? What is Trump's these days, look at the economy? Well, he wants to say no more Obamacare. So he doesn't want government to do a lot of spending. And he also probably a Republican, and the Republicans, they want to cut taxes. So they will go back to corporates and companies and they say, you know what, we're going to give you lower taxes and then you can do more money. And,
it would be the same like this period, 2001.
Yeah, we'll go back to these cutting taxes. Maybe we'll see a recession. Physical stimuli will shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. And then the Fed started to lower interest rates in the 2007 to prevent from slowing down. And of course, we started to see what happened to interest rates when they stayed very high for a while. And then we start to see this economic big crisis, the subprime in 2008. And, the economy continues, macro economy, how to solve it. We've got new theories. People try things, some of them fail, and then you go back again and try. That's the end of this chapter.